Okay, thanks. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so without further ado, we'll just get started. So this is going to be about Sarvatobhadra Chakra and using one case study, which is our current affairs. I think it's always good to make it about something that's very real and impacting us. So as you know, everyone knows our wonderful lineage. I'm part of, the great teachers. I mean, I'm hanging on to their coattails and my fingernails, but, so I've been in Sikh Dharma all my adult life and my teacher, Yogi Bhajan. And I've been fortunate to study under Pandit Sanjay Rath and Guru V. Sarbani. So they need no further introduction. So we're going to talk about Sarvatobhadra Chakra. We'll take a moment to tune in. So I'm going to call on the Guru. This is from Guru Arjan. We call on 4 levels of the Guru. And so I'll just chant this 2 times. So it's Ad Gure Name, Jugad Gure Name, Sat Gure Name, Siddhi Guru Deve Name. I'll chant that 2 times. Chant along if you like. Ad Gure Name, Jugad Gure Name, Sat Gure Name, Siddhi Guru Deve Name. Ad Gure Name, Jugad Gure Name, Sat Gure Name, Siddhi Guru Deve Name. Waheguru. So, Sarvatobhadra Chakra is, its secrets are, there is a tantric text called Brahma Yamala, and this is one of the main written sources for the Sarvatobhadra Chakra. And Mantreshwara in Phalidipika also mentions it. So otherwise, we kind of have to find it through various scattered books. Maybe Gordon knows about other books that have Sarvatobhadra Chakra in it. Basically, one thing that we learn in the tradition from Pandit Sanjay Rath is that the levels of the horoscope levels of things we learn in Jyotish correspond to the chakras and to the 14 lokas or worlds. And we live in the lowest level called Bhuloka, and that maps to the first chakra. And in the horoscope, this is the realm of bhavas. The bhavas themselves, the geometry of the bhavas is on the earth plane. And then we go to the second level, which corresponds to Bhuvaloka, the planets rotating through the solar system. This is where the grahas are, and they eclipse our mind and make us go through our karmas. And so in the horoscope, this corresponds to the 8th house and the 6th house, the second chakra. Then the final human level, before we get to higher spiritual worlds, is at the navel level. And this corresponds to Swarga Loka. So the nakshatras are placed in Swarga Loka. They're at a heavenly level. They're in the starry sky of night. And they control the thinking of all thinking beings. And as we think, so we are. So because they're influencing our mind and our thoughts, they're controlled by Chandra. They control our thoughts, and that controls our actions, and that controls our destiny. So this Manipura chakra, the navel chakra, relates to Swarga, and this is the highest level that normal humans get to. And this is where the fixed stars are orbiting around the Nabi or navel of Mahavishnu. So that's why this Sarvatobhadra Chakra is so powerful and so strong, because it is showing the movement of planets in the nakshatras. Destiny is being determined at this level of Swarga Loka, and it can only be changed and overridden from the higher spiritual realms of the higher chakras. So we know the power of the navel. Martial artists know that by controlling their navel, they control everything about their life force. So again, this is just about the importance of this chakra. But one reason is it is not studied more is because it is so complex. But, many people have shown different versions of the, different looks of this magic prism, as I like to call it. But it all has certain factors in common. There's certain rules about it that we'll look at. So it can seem overwhelming, but the consistent elements are the 5 tattvas, the five limbs of time in the Panchang are all represented in this one chakra in a most ingenious way. And the navel energy is said to be dominated by Shakti energy. This is an expression of the Divine Mother coming through, ruling these nakshatras and coming through everything that we're experiencing in the human world. So this is a good look of the Sarvatobhadra Chakra, showing the nakshatras ranged around these outer cells. And we'll get to what's going on somewhat in the inside also. So the entire Panchang is in this diagram, the 5 limbs of time. We have the nakshatras, of course, are the Vayu or air element, and they are traveling around this outer square, the 4 parts of the outer square. And then we have the yoga, nitya, the daily yoga, which is found by adding the degrees of sun and moon. That is the akash or ether element. And that is found in the aksharas, the letters. So it's very interesting. We see letters scattered all over this chakra. We have letters on these 4 gateways. We have letters in this next circle inside from the nakshatras. And these letters relate to the yoga in the Panchang. So we'll see in our case study that they're very important. And they have to do with the name of a person. Then we have the Vara, the weekdays, which is the fire element, and the weekdays are arranged around the center. Saturday, the last day of the week, is in the very center, and the other weekdays are arranged around it. Then we have the water element is in the tithis, and the tithis are also side by side with the Varas. Vara and tithis are working together. Purna relates to Purnima, the 15th tithi, and the other groups of tithis are in these squares. And then finally, we have Karana, which is part of the Panchang, which is like the child of the tithi. The water element divides in 2, and the earth element is there. And that is about actions. And it's shown in the signs of the chart where actions happen. So the Karana, which is these signs, which is in the 3rd layer in, are related to career, and this is, when a ray from a planet goes through one of these, then we can expect actions around that area of our karma. Okay, so here's a more simple look at the Sarvatobhadra Chakra. It just has, the key elements. We have nakshatras shown by their initials, and it goes around clockwise. It starts in the northeast corner, which is where northeast is sacred to the energy of Ishana, the Guru form of Jupiter. And nakshatras have to do with Vayu, or the movement. It's all about movement. So they're about transits. Transits are movement. And so the study of transits is so valuable when we do it with this chakra, because that's what this chakra is made for. And since we're studying movement, then the speed and the direction of movement is key. So the the line of force coming from a planet will depend on what direction it's moving in. Is it retrograde? Is it forward? And how fast is it going? In what percentage of its maximum speed is it traveling at? When it's at its maximum speed, it's going to have a very intense forward thrust, or Veda. When it's retrograde, it's going to have a backward Veda. So there are three kinds of Vedas, which are we can say they're an analogy of aspects, but they're not aspects. They are the flow of energy because of movement. And so Veda is a word that can either mean good and pious, or it can mean piercing, destroying, breaching. So the energy of a Veda, whether it's good or bad, will depend on the planet it's coming from. And it will depend on the condition of the planet. So the backward and forward Vedas will impact the diagonal Vedas, that is, will impact the other factors that they pass through diagonally. So, for example, here we have Surya in Purva Phalguni Nakshatra. Surya always has Vedas in all three directions, and it will put its forward Veda diagonally. It's perfect geometry. It goes, you can just trace it diagonally through these boxes, and we end up in this cell Abhijit, Nakshatra 22. So the forward impact of Surya is falling into Abhijit. And on the way, it's passing through the sign of Virgo. It's passing through, this is the sign of Sagittarius. So those signs, the karmas around those signs will also get lit up and heightened. And then we have the backward Veda, and the backward Veda will go diagonally, perfect geometry, backwards from Purva Phalguni, and it will end up in Pusha. Goes through this cell, and then it ends here in Pusha. So just so that you're all getting it, so we'll do the same thing with the moon. Look at its two diagonal Vedas. Its forward diagonal Veda is going over here from Jeshta, and you can just track diagonally. It's a perfect line, and it ends up in Ashwini. Its backward Veda goes diagonally back to Swati. This is Swati Nakshatra number 15. So an easy way, mental way to understand where a Veda is going, so you don't have to use your finger or draw a line to track it, is just to look at the count on these four sides. Since the moon is in the second nakshatra going up, as it's moving forward, its Veda, its front Veda, will be in the second box going backwards. So the second one going forwards will have a Veda into the second one going backwards. Same with Surya. Surya is in the second cell going forwards in this row, and it will have its Veda in the second one coming backwards in this row. So that's how the diagonal ones work, and we'll see them in action. Now, the third type of Veda is the side or a cross Veda. It goes directly across from wherever the planet is to the cell exactly across from it. So the other side. Now, these Vedas jump. They do not impact the boxes in the middle that they're going through. So if there were a letter or a sign or a tidhi or whatever, they will be left undisturbed by the side Veda of any planet. Okay, so I think those are the key things. And feel free to interrupt with questions if anything's not clear, because it's important that you get this point. One other thing I just want to mention is that the planets who have Vedas on all three sides are only the luminaries and the nodes, Sun and Moon and Rahu and Ketu. They always have Vedas going in all three of these directions. The other 5 planets only get one Veda, and their Veda depends on the speed. If they're going retrograde, it'll be a back Veda. If they're going forward, it'll be a forward Veda. And if they're in the middle ground, where they turned direct, but they haven't gotten up to full speed, then they have a side Veda. So the point where the speed becomes forward instead of sideways is that 120% of its basic daily speed. So there's tables in software that will tell you when a planet has reached 120% of its normal daily speed. Okay, so then another important thing to know is that there are 4 very sensitive, extremely quivering with vibration areas of the chakra, which are the 4 corners. In the 4 corners are the vowels. Is at the beginning here, the inception, this northeast corner where the whole chakra begins. So the sound which is the inception of the whole alphabet, is there. And the other 4 corners have the purest, strongest vowels. You have I, in the 4 corners. And they get triggered. They start vibrating only when a planet is in the corners, in these corners. And not only that, the planet has to be in the pada, which is a 1/4 division of a nakshatra, only in the last pada of Bharani or the first pada of Kritika. So the pada that is touching the corner, either the last one you're going in, the 4th pada of that nakshatra, or the first pada of that nakshatra if you're coming out. So it's kind of like a Gandanta thing. When planets are in this last pada or first pada, they set off what we call the primal scream, because they make these vowels start to vibrate. And when one vowel vibrates, all 4 vowels vibrate. So it feels like the whole world is on fire, because the entire cosmos starts vibrating when a planet goes around the corner through the scream area. And if it's a malefic planet, that can be very troubling. If it's a benefic planet, it can be very positive. So the other high energy points on the chakra are the 4 portals at the gates in the mandala. We have the north, the south, the east, the west, and in the central nakshatra of each of these 4 is a high energy area. You can think of it as a vortex where, we saw on this other picture that we have aksharas in these central portals. There are extra aksharas there because there's more akash, there's more, there's more power in those because they're opening up to the higher planes. So that's also good to know. So all the nakshatras are equal in degrees, 13 degrees in 20 minutes, with one exception, and that is Abhijit. So Abhijit is nakshatra number 22, and only in this scheme is it used. In the normal 27 scheme of nakshatras, Abhijit is usually ignored. But Abhijit is an overlay in Capricorn. It's only 4 degrees and 13 minutes, 20 seconds, starting at Capricorn, 6 degrees and 40 minutes. And this is very special, but it's treated as if it's a full-size nakshatra as far as Vedhas and everything else go. And this is where Hari is said to have his abode. So this is a very powerful, sacred nakshatra. Abhijit is said to be the only male nakshatra. All the others are wives of Chandra, the moon god. And Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, among the nakshatras, I am Abhijit. So Abhijit has a power over all the other nakshatras. Any transit through Abhijit is having power to command. Also useful to know when we look at the chakra is that different nakshatras are called special nakshatras. We count them from the moon. because the moon is the overlord of the Sarvatobhadra Chakra. And so each one of them has a special impact, a special effect. And there are other systems for studying which nakshatras have effects. But most important in the Magic Prism are these special ones from the moon. So just for an example, the Abhishek nakshatra, 28th one, these all, of course, have Sanskrit names, but I'm just putting in the English names for now. The 28th one is called Abhishek, and this means coronation. So in worldly affairs and mundane charts, it deals with things about power and leadership. And so it shows how much control and dominance the person can have or the leader has over others. So once again, for especially important for war, like we're going to look at a chart of war today, or politics. The third one, Jati, the fourth one, this one, number 4, the fourth from the moon. These are all, the numbers here are counted inclusively from the position of the moon. So where moon itself is, the first one is Janama, or birth, health, self. The fourth one inclusively from the moon is called Jati, which means community, tribe, ethnicity. So questions about ethnicity, struggles over racism, all things like that will show up in Jati nakshatra. The 7th one is danger and death. The 10th one is the power of the leader. The 18th one, Samyudayaka, means the final outcome. So those are some key important ones. I just also mentioned this 27 is the nation. So of course, this is very important in a chart of war, because it shows how is the population supporting the leader. If the leader is going to be defeated and sent into exile, afflictions to this nakshatra will be the key to look for. So, and then again, the coronation or Abhishek, this is where Rudra prevails. This shows the amount of this can show the anger of the gods. This shows fate or destiny. Negative influences show a loss or a fall from power. And positive influences show celebration of victory. So we'll go into this case study about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this is kind of a part 2, because I recently did a talk with Raman and Rajeshwari, their masterclass. So I gave a class on Jupiter and Sun conjunctions and the timing of war. And for anyone interested, I put the link here because it's available for free. And you can look at that if you're interested in some of the research that went into, that's kind of behind what I'm going to show today. So in that, we discussed about that wars are not just random things that can flare up anytime. Major wars that involve multiple countries and threaten, create terrible conditions for the world, they come in a pattern. They are cyclical. They obey the rules of timing in the greater cycles. And so the cycle that I was discussing in that other talk was about the Sun-Jupiter conjunctions in Sagittarius. I'm sure it'd be really interesting to put this together with, like I just listened to Gordon's talk at Baba about timing of these kind of events. So they kind of feed into each other. There's something very significant that he found that I'll mention that applies to this. But so what we found as far as studying when wars arise is the big ones come after a conjunction of Sun with Jupiter. Now, of course, that happens every 12 or 13 years, and a major war does not manifest every 12 or 13 years. In fact, there have been only 4 since the year 1814. But that is because a couple of other conditions have to be met. One is that Mars must be in its own sign at the time of the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in Sagittarius, or Saturn in its own sign. Either one has to be in strength. And the following 2 years of Sun-Jupiter conjunctions must skip over Dhanishta nakshatra. So in other words, the year after Sun joins Jupiter in Sagittarius, it will join it in Capricorn, right? So this cannot be in Dhanishta. It could be in Shravana. It could be in, it could be in Uttarashada, but it cannot be in Dhanishta, or the war will be snuffed. It will not happen. Thank goodness. That's a good thing. Possibly because Dhanishta is ruled by Kartikeya, by Muruga, who is the god of war, and for some reason, he does not allow war to happen in his cycle. But on all these major cases, so these calamitous wars have erupted only 4 times since 1818. We had World War I, which was timed around the Sun Jupiter in Sagittarius, and which I went through in the other talk. World War II. And we had one in the late 90s, which was kind of diffused. So it was really the rise of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all that, and even also wars in the Balkans. But the chart of that was a little bit, it wasn't as clear cut as these other 3 wars. And finally, we have Russia and Ukraine, which is going on now, which began with the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in 2019. So we'll see how that works. It's as if, why the Sun-Jupiter, and this is, I think Sonal was just talking about that, about how Sagittarius is known as a sign of war. But it's owned by Jupiter, the planet of peace and protection. And interestingly, so when Sun and Jupiter come together in Sagittarius, it's the sun is like burning or putting into astangata, or a combustion, Jupiter. So it's like the planet of peace is getting erased temporarily, and so war can break out if the other conditions allow it. Now, for the studies that I'm doing in mundane astrology, I'm following the advice of Surya Siddhanta, which says we can study mundane charts from a place called Yamakoti, which is at the eastern edge of the world. And I find it to be a really good technique because it allows kind of a one common denominator for every chart you study. There's a dilemma that mundane astrologers have to do many charts for all the countries they might be considering. And when you instead just do one chart for Yamakoti, you can set it as rising at Yamakoti. And when you do that, that's one technique, one way to go about it. And that way you get some amazing confluences, which we'll see an example of. So Surya Siddhanta mentions these 4 parts of the world. Sunrise happens over in the east at Yamakoti, and the noon for the world, it's like we spread out along one day the 4 phases of the sun. We have sunrise in the east, that's Yamakoti. We have sun at noon over India and Asia, and that's called Ujjain. And we have sunset, which comes about just west of the Horn of Africa, and that's called Bhumaka. And finally, we have the deep midnight for the sun, and that falls over in the Western Hemisphere, the benighted West. So that place is called Siddhapuri. So all these places are considered real places by Surya Siddhanta. So we can set our charts there And that's what I'm using for these example charts. So this is the Sun-Jupiter conjunction in 2019 set at Yamakoti. So Yamakoti is situated in the Far East. It's at 165 degrees and 46 minutes to the east, and it's on the equator, and the time zone would be 12 hours east. So that would be my basis for all the charts I'm going to show. Now, we see here that the conditions for war are met because Sun is conjunct Jupiter in the 12th degree of Sagittarius in Mula, which is, the root chakra. And we have Mars in its own sign in Scorpio. And in the following 2 years, the Sun-Jupiter conjunctions are not in Dhanishta. So this is a dangerous chart, and it's happening on the day of a full moon eclipse, which happens about 12 hours later in the 13th degree of Gemini. So we'll see how significant this is in all the subsequent charts. This is like our natal chart for the whole case study. Okay, so remembering what we said about the 4 portals in this chart of the Sun-Jupiter conjunction, the nodes, Ketu and Rahu, are sitting in the portals. They're sitting, Rahu is in Ardra, Ketu is in Purvashada, and they're putting their Vedhas. Remember, the nodes have Vedhas in all 3 directions. So Ketu is putting a Veda into this other portal, and there we have the special nakshatra called danger, death and danger. And Rahu is putting its Veda into death and danger. And then their other Vedas are coming into the other portal on the south, which is disputes, arguments, and wars. So this was baked in the cake, so to speak, at the Sun-Jupiter conjunction, that we would have a terrible, fateful war, basically. And very interesting to note is that Ketu is in the coronation or Abhishek nakshatra. So the Abhishek nakshatra shows the anger of the gods when it's being afflicted. So, of course, also Ketu and Rahu also have a side Veda on each other. And, usually, and they, so again, that just compounds the inextricable problem that exists with this situation. So again, we have the ascendant of that Sun-Jupiter chart here in Mula, and then after it is from the moon coronation, because this is the 28th nakshatra. This is the last nakshatra before the moon. Moon is here. This is Janama, or birth. And so if we count all the way around, the final one from the moon is coronation or Abhishek. And there we have the Ketu. So this is just really a horrible look of something locked in. So just to repeat this slide so that we see exactly, this is exactly this situation. These are the 4 portals. These have more akash, more aksharas, more letters. So these are like energy vortices. And this is where the nodes fell. It's where we saw that before. So this is something sent from above because of the anger of the gods. Now we're going to focus, among the 5 elements, we're going to focus on the Nitya Yoga, the Akasha element, the letters, aksharas, or name letters. So this is an important part of the Panchang. And it's shown by, we take the name of the native and we take the first letter of the name. And that sensitive point will show where is its akash, where is its binding force. So when this letter is being transited diagonally by a Veda, this means very significant events for that person or country. So especially if you lack a natal chart for a country, like in this case of Ukraine, Russia, I think we do have a chart for Ukraine. I think it's in 1991. It was like a kind of a declaration of independence. And I think there's consensus about exactly when that was. But then for the current Russian administration, that might even be a younger chart than Ukraine's. And there's, I guess, there seems to be argument about exactly what is that ascendant. So I was very interested to just see yesterday in Gordon's talk that he gave a precise degree for Russia's ascendant, I think, in the current Chaitra Shukla Paksh, and that degree is extremely significant in the charts I'm using here too, so I will mention that. But for now, I'm using Russia, the name, as to identify it, and Ukraine instead of their natal charts. So I'm using their akshara, their nam akshara. So if we look at this chart again at the Sun-Jupiter Sagittarius conjunction starting the war, we would look for the name Russia. So the sound is Ra, and this Ra is in this cell right here. And Ra is pierced by any planet that would be in Purvashada or in Hasta, because they would put their diagonal data through Ra. And we see, in fact, this fateful Ketu Veda is coming down from the Abhishek, the coronation, diagonally right through Russia and right into dispute. So that is, okay, that's a pretty clear message there. And then we can think about, well, Venus has to do with the desires and the jala. And so we see Venus is in the corner nakshatra Shravana, but it's not in the fourth pada, so it's not in the scream, but it is putting a forward Veda into community, jati, tribe, ethnicity. So we see there's a strong sense of desire and motivation to, Venus is a Rajas planet full of craving. So there's craving for community, for connecting to this community. One note about how to read this little diagram is these little numbers is the number just above, next to a planet, we see two numbers. The number above is the pada of the four padas or four divisions of a nakshatra. It could be 1, 2, 3, or 4, and Venus is in the second pada. 22 refers to which numbered nakshatra. So it's in the second pada. It would have to be in the fourth pada to be in the scream. So it's not in the scream. Okay, and now the name of the victim of the invasion in our case, is Ukraine. So Ukraine is a vowel. The vowels are in the diagonals that go through the very center of the magic prism. The center has Saturday, and it's only activated by vowels and by planets in the corner. The center is, we can think of it as the Om. It's like the creative fountain from which everything else is coming. And it only gets activated when something is touching off the four corners simultaneously, and what I call the scream is happening. So that scream happens, and the center activates, and all four diagonals. So the name Ukraine is in a vowel that is on the diagonal of the scream. So, and we could say, you might say, is it a short U? I believe the better fit is a long U, Ukraine, Ukraina. So Ukraina is getting activated anytime a planet goes through the corners and sets off the scream. And we see just mention here that there is indeed one planet in the screen at this natal chart, at this Sun-Jupiter conjunction. The planet in the screen, being in the fourth pada of Vishaka, is Mangal. So Mars is in the corner. It is activating the screen. It is hitting Ukraine. Okay, so a little bit more about the rules that I was using to see this outbreak of war is that it will break out. So once the 12-year cycle of Sun Jupiter in Sagittarius begins, the major war, if it's coming, will come during one of the 2 years of this Sun Jupiter in Capricorn or Aquarius. And again, remember, if it happens in Dhanishta, they will be exempted from war. So there'll be 2 to 3 years after the Sun-Jupiter conjunction that the war will begin. In all 4 of the case studies, this is how it works. And the immediate trigger will be a transit of Mars or Saturn over Ketu, which is the army, the headless army. So this now is the chart for the bombing, the moment that the first bombs were falling in Kyiv and elsewhere in Ukraine. And this is set at Yamakoti, and the Lagna degree is 10 degrees Gemini. And so I was flabbergasted to see Gordon's chart showing Russia's ascendant in the Chaitra Shukla Paksha as being something like 8 or 9 Gemini. So like, wow, okay, that's a hit. So the war did break out in the year following the Sun-Jupiter. Mangal had transited Ketu back on December 14th of 21. That was when Russia was already massing the troops. And the Lagna is this 10th degree of Gemini is exactly opposite the eclipse point of the original Sun-Jupiter conjunction. It's just about opposite the ascendant of the Sun-Jupiter conjunction chart. So this was my point earlier, that when you use these Yamakoti charts, you see these incredible bullseye hits of confluence with things. So it just, it's a great technique to have in your arsenal of your studying mundane charts, because it gives you a least common denominator for all the charts to relate them to each other. Here we see the 2 charts compared. Above we have the Sun Jupiter in Sagittarius, and below we have the moment of the start of the invasion. So Lagnas are exactly opposite, 9 degrees Sag, 10 degrees Gemini. And in the invasion chart, the Atmakaraka is Mars here in the 7th house, where it's in extreme pain. It's exactly conjunct the Saturn of the natal chart of the Sun-Jupiter conjunction. The Atmakaraka there is Saturn in 27 Sagittarius. The war broke out as Mars was at 28 Sagittarius, in 1-7 from each other. Also very interesting, we see Ketu in the invasion here at 2 degrees Scorpio is conjunct Mars in the Sun-Jupiter chart. So that is one of the conditions for war, that Mars or Saturn has to be conjunct Ketu. So now we'll get into these complicated looking little diagrams, but once you work with them and get used to them, they're not so terrible. So this is, now we have an extra layer around our magic prism. The extra layer is the transits. So here in these 4 in here are the natal chart that we've been discussing. Here's the Sun-Jupiter conjunction, here's the Ketu in Abhishek, here's Moon, all that. So they go around like that, and then we add an extra ring around them, and this is the transit chart for the moment of the invasion. So these are the transits outside, and these are the natal. This is a very convenient way to study transits once you get accustomed to it, because it lets you see exactly how the planet is moving and what it's impacting in the natal chart. So I want to draw our attention to just a couple of things, which is these red lines show the scream being activated. So just think of this as an unbroken line. I made it kind of dashed because I didn't want to cross through these letters and days of the week and titties in between. I just want it, but it's a straight diagonal line from corner to corner. And when one corner is activated, all four corners are activated and the whole world is screaming. So we see that, and we see, do we have planets in the corner impacting the scream? Yes, indeed, we do. We have Saturn in the first pada of Dhanishta, so it is in the scream. We have Ketu in the fourth pada of Vishaka, so it is in the scream. And we already had natal Mars in the fourth pada of Vishaka, so it too is in the scream. So we're fully activating this scream that is going to crush Ukraine. But interestingly, Rahu is Russia, is completely untouched. Russia is free, not being hit by anything at the time of the invasion. It's just dropping bombs without too much care about it. It's just doing what it does. And of course, we did have the natal Ketu going through the Ra, that's still there. But at the time of transit, nothing is impacting Russia. Now, the other thing to know about these, the transits, when a planet is in the scream, it really has two Vedhas. One Veda is being in the corners and setting that off. The other Veda is its normal Veda for just being in this particular nakshatra and having a Veda appropriate for whatever speed it's going. So Saturn was going at forward speed. It was transiting through community, the tribes, the ethnicities, the races, the whole thing. That's the issue that Venus was also impacting. And it's putting a forward Veda, going through Aquarius and going through Friday and going through all these things and ending up over here in Aslesha. And this is the particular special nakshatra called the final result, Samudayaka. What would be the bottom line from this whole event? And then, so Saturn there is not so good. And there, it's also in the transit, it is disputes, which is wars, so a war. So that's what Saturn is doing. Now, what about Ketu? Saturn only has one Veda because it's not a luminary and it's not a node. But Ketu has three Vedas because it's a node. So Ketu transit will put one side Veda right across onto Saturn. So when you get Saturn and Ketu ganging up on each other, it's horrendously afflicting. And this is, we can call it a Shraddha Yoga. It's extreme pain, and it has roots in deep generational issues. So that's going on. And we have the diagonal Veda backwards from Ketu is going over here to Anuradha, and the transit of the moon was there over the weekend as this invasion was being ordered. Now, the way to read this, you have to get kind of used to this, is when the planet is transiting, think of it as being in the cell that it's right next to. Otherwise, you'll get confused as to how the diagonal goes. So you think of it as Ketu is like sitting here in Vishaka, and its diagonal is going like this, just one step over to Anuradha. So even though we see the transiting factors on the outside, the geometry just follows the structure of the inner, the basic natal structure. So same here, Saturn, it's as if it's sitting here in the community nakshatra, and then you can read the diagonal that way. So one other interesting point here is the moon. The moon over the weekend. Of course, the moon travels very fast, and we're not trying to talk about I'm trying to talk about just the slow planets, because otherwise it becomes overwhelming and too confusing. But it was just interesting that this moon, which went over the screen in the hours before the invasion started, was going over Putin's natal lugna. So that's a topic for another talk. Okay, so now the other thing to notice here is, since Saturn and Ketu both are in the scream padas, first pada of Dhanishta, last pada of Vishaka, we should follow their movements through the Sarvatobhadra Chakra, follow their transits, and we will get in a nutshell the whole course of the war. When will the war end? How is the war playing out? If we just follow Saturn and Ketu, we'll get the gist of the whole story. So that's what we'll do. So this is just an example of how you can keep track of an event. If you want to study something in your own life or whatever, you just list the changes of speed of the planet, and it's better to take just the slow moving planet. So I'm only going to use Saturn. And then you can see what it contacts, and you can see how causal it is. The whole point of this thing is that this is the action of the higher energies, and we are their pawns. So that, you can say the crisis started back when Saturn was in Abhijit, and the sun also went through Abhijit, and that is when Ukraine started talking about and pushing that maybe we want to be in NATO, which definitely freaked out President Putin. So keep moving forward, and Saturn was doing various changes. Saturn went into Shravana, and it went retrograde in Shravana, and all this took a lot of time, and then it started moving forward in November 21, and in December, the actual war trigger of Mars conjunct Ketu happened, and that's where Putin demanded some permanent guarantees, and then he started massing troops and doing all kinds of things. And Saturn came into the screen in January of 22. So it got into the fourth pada of Shravana, and it was in the screen. And at this point, Russia was now massing more and more troops, and all the stuff around that was happening. And then in February, Saturn reached its maximum forward speed, and it's conjunct the natal Venus, and which is the day lord, and it's all about, its forward beta is about jati, community, ethnic issues. Ukraine is ours, this is our community, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is in the screen, and it reached its maximum speed, and then it went around the corner from Shravana nakshatra to Dhanishta. So that was hugely, there's no stopping fate unraveling from here. And on February 18th, it moved into Dhanishta, the first pada. It's in the screen, and it will be in the screen all the way until March 19th of 22. And the bombing and invasion started 6 days after Saturn came into Dhanishta, a nakshatra which is ruled by Muruga, or Kartikeya, the god of war. And so it is not good to have, we see that it's very paradoxical that when the Sun-Jupiter conjunction happens in Dhanishta, it prevents war. But now this war broke out as Saturn, right as Saturn comes into Dhanishta, and the drums of war become extremely loud. So, we won't get into all the details, but you can get very detailed and see the action of the planets very vividly. So then Saturn came out of the screen on March 19th, and then the war ground on for a while, and it looked like Russia was going to crush Ukraine. And meanwhile, there was a mutual side Veda going on that we saw already between Ketu and Saturn, both putting their side Veda on each other. I mean, that became strong there. So that was when Russia took over the steel plant and destroyed Mariupol, and a lot of things happened. But the key thing to know for understanding Sarvatobhadra Chakra is that the holding pattern for this war, the thing that got it going and made it seem just so immutable, is this side Veda between Saturn in Dhanishta and Ketu in Vishaka. So they're both, Ketu has a side Veda. Saturn only will have a side Veda in those periods of time when it has finished stationing and is slowly going faster, or when it's stopping from maximum speed and going backwards. So there's a short period of time. So I wanted to show on this slide that this is where you can find the speed of planets in Sri Jyoti Star software. There's this table called Astronomical Data. And in it, there's velocity per day for each planet. So it gives the actual speed at which the planet moves. And then this column is what's important. It has the percent of its normal, okay? Because obviously, Jupiter and Moon have totally different speeds per day. But what we look at to follow the Magic Prism is we need to see where is this percent. If it is greater than 120% for these 5 element planets, the 5 planets that have elements and that only get 1 Veda depending on speed, like Mangal. Mangal is at 141%, so 120 is the cutoff. So above 120, it's got a forward Veda. Below 120, it's got a side Veda. So in this chart, Saturn only has 72%. So it will have a side Veda, not a forward Veda. So that's where you find the speed. And it's really critical for studying this chakra because we need to know which way is the piercing of that planet going. So at this particular moment in time, Saturn is going sideways and Ketu is always going sideways. So that is a huge double whammy. They're both hitting on each other, and that causes tremendous violence and affliction. So then, the events moved on to coming up to the present. What happened was that on August 30th, Saturn, which had been, just go back to the other chart just so we see that movement of Saturn again. So in March, Saturn got into the second pada of Dhanishta. And yay, it's getting away from the screen. However, it retrograded and it started back towards the screen. So it retrograded on June 5th. And so now, by August 30th, it has retrograded all the way back into the first pada again. And once again, it is in the screen. It is vibrating all 4 corners. But this time, retrograde planets turn things around, right? So the month of September and October has been terrible for Russia. So the whole tide of the war seems to have completely shifted. So since the beginning of September, Ukraine has retaken much of the southern states, and especially Donetsk and Luhansk, the states that Russia was controlling. Ukraine has sent them fleeing out of there. And things are going from bad to worse for Russia right now. They're just retreating and they're in terrible shape. They've lost over 60,000 soldiers and they've lost huge amounts of weaponry, and things are not looking good for them at all. So what will happen in the future, Saturn will turn direct in the screen, Dhanishta, on October 23rd. And so we can expect from there is Russia's offensive capacity will be even more reduced, and K2 will no longer be supporting it. Transit K2 will have moved on out of the side Veda. And so that means the army is lacking what it had before. And so anyway, I won't go into speculation about all what it will mean, but we see on November 16th, Saturn's Veda will turn from a side Veda to a forward Veda, which hits the overall outcome, Samyudayaka Nakshatra, over in, I think it's Aslesha. So we're going to be winding down and looking for the way out of the morass for Russia at this point. Now, the sun goes through the screen, through Dhanishta, through Shravana and Dhanishta, the week of November 16th to 23rd coming up. And the sun will be putting aside Veda, sun will not be in Dhanishta, it will be in Anuradha and Vishaka and Anuradha. So, but it will be in the screen. So it will be vibrating where Saturn is also in the screen. And so this will be terrible time for the leader because Sun Saturn is a dosha for the leader. So watch that week. So again, just looking at how we can understand how the timing will break, how we can use the magic prism to see the movement of a situation. We see that this Ketu was so serious being in Vishaka. We discussed all the ways it was so serious. And what happens on October 19th, in just a short period of time from now, Ketu will be shifted over out of Vishaka into Swati. And once it's in Swati, it's not in the screen, it's not impacting or supporting or being supported by Saturn. And what it is doing is it's putting its Veda through Russia. So that is extremely significant. Remember how Ketu is in the Abhishek to begin with in the natal chart. And now in transit, it will also be in Russia. So what we can say is Russia will wake up to its mistake because Ketu is the planet of mistakes. And so we'll see, and it's impacting on the other end, country. So the population of Russia is also waking up to the mistake. So that's something very important that's already starting now because events cast their shadows ahead of time. And so even though technically it doesn't happen until 19th of October, we can already feel the energy beginning to shift. And any short moving, fast moving planet like Mercury, Mercury will come through and hit Russia. You could, if you're tracking events closely, you can see events related to Mercury as Mercury goes through Hasta. But we're not going to talk about the fast moving planets. So just as of today, the world got this news that the bridge from Russia to Crimea has been blown up, and Ketu and Rahu rule bridges, connecting links. So the bombing happened the day after President Putin's birthday. So we see the action of the planets. But only one malefic impacting a country or a person is not enough to force something to stop. We need ideally 3 malefics or 2 malefics to bring something to an end. So we see that, basically what has happened since this Saturn is retrograding is it's turned the tables. And the Saturn Veda, when it shifts from side to forward, will start speeding up and make the new reality become apparent more quickly. So in the earlier talk, I was talking about the connection of eclipses to these events and that they're very important for following timing. So we see the next few eclipses coming up we have, we have pairs of solar eclipses followed by lunar eclipses, and then later it shifts to lunar eclipses followed by solar eclipses. So really within this pattern is 1 unit of time. And so we see that the matter will end before or on this last eclipse of this group of eclipses. So then we can use the Sarvatobhadra Chakra to try to figure out which one. And so without going through all the trial and error that I checked on, this is the one that I came up with. And this is the full moon eclipse of May 6th, 2023. And so we'll see that this is a very plausible time that by now the shooting will be totally over, and the situation will move on to something else. So here we see the upper chart is the natal Sun Jupiter in Sag conjunction, and below we have the nodes. Below we have this chart for that full moon eclipse of May, early May, this coming May, early May. So here we see the nodes of the eclipse are on the they are in the degrees, not on, but they're in the degrees of the Sun-Jupiter conjunction. They're at 9 degrees of Aries, trining this lugna, and 9 degrees of Sagittarius. And the eclipse Atmakarka of Mars, which we saw when the bombing started, we saw that Mars was conjunct the original AK Saturn. Now we see Mars is opposite, is the AK again, and is opposite. It's in 27 Gemini, opposite 27 Sag. Also, we see the Saturn of this eclipse chart being at 11 degrees 33 minutes of Aquarius, and the Sun-Jupiter conjunction was at 11 degrees 35 minutes of Sagittarius. So again, a very strong link. And also at the time of this eclipse in this coming May, early May, we will have the requisite number of malefics interdicting the Russian momentum. Because what we have here is Ketu will be in Swati, and at this eclipse, Ketu is in the, guess what, the coronation or Abhishek nakshatra, putting this Veda through Russia. And the Veda lands in the desha or country, the country special nakshatra, meaning the population of the country. And it's the overall or net result, bottom line, finish. The whole thing is done. And this is what has happened, nakshatra, samyudayaka. At the same time, Rahu will be putting its Veda into that place. And Saturn will now have moved out of Dhanishta, where it's been languishing for all these months, creating so much misery. And it will be in Saptabhishaj, which is 1,000 lights, the healing positions, full of solutions. So finally, Shani will be put to work finding a real solution. And it will have its, it will be being impacted by Ketu. So it's like as if Ketu is saying, we're stopping now. This is stopping. And, so those are some of the key things happening there. And so the gods are again piercing this Ra Akshara, and the Vedas go to the net result on the country. So because there's impact from Rahu, impact from Ketu, and Ketu is kind of getting impact because of the Shani being across from it, we can say it's a triple stop, and we can expect the leader of the country will be gone because we see Ketu in the coronation, meaning, toppling of a leader. So that would be, we'll hazard a prediction like that. So we can say again, who wins? Who really wins in a war? No one. In all these Sun-Jupiter cycle wars, the 4 of them since 1814, or 1818, whichever it was, the aggressor has lost. So the one initiating the conflict, Germany invading Belgium, Germany invading Poland, ISIS trying to, seize power. The aggressors always lose because it's as if Jupiter is reasserting its nature of peace, justice, of, upholding the rights of humanity. So if we have to make a prediction, that would be our prediction. And it's interesting that there was this coin minted by the prince of Novgorod, who was the Grand Prince of Kiev and ruled Kievan Russia until 1054. So the roots of this conflict go back very, very far. And people who just try to say that Ukraine is a vassal of Russia need to go back and study their history a bit more. So, so that is all my slides, and so I just hope, the point of this whole exercise is to understand the power of Sarvatobhadra Chakra, to see these energy forces, which are awesome, and, to see this chakra puts them in some kind of way that our minds can try to comprehend them a little bit. And I hope this has been a helpful study to show the potential for this. And remember, this is the energy of the Mahamaya, the Mother Divine. And so I'd like to end with a little fitting quote from my spiritual teacher, reminding of the power of this Shakti, feminine Shakti, to build from nothing to a mighty city. So from these elements, everything we experience grow up. And respect for women is very important in this. So he said, what is a woman? Woman is the flowing river of spirit. On its banks dwells a man. It is the flow of that river, that spirit. If that woman is clean, healthy, and constant, the dweller shall not leave the dwelling. That dwelling will turn itself into a city, a town, a capital. So, so thank you. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you for having your Jyotish gatherings and supporting all of us students, Jyotishis. And so I guess I'll end the slideshow. And questions, anybody wants to bring up any questions, comments, criticisms, arguments, etc., you're very welcome.
I have a question. There was a lot of information, and then I know you said that there would be a problem for a leader, but I don't quite recall the dates. Would that problem be for Putin, in your opinion, or for Zelensky, based upon where the transits are?
Okay, well, based on the transits, the problem is going through Russia. So I think it's going to be for the Russian leader.
Gotcha. I know at the end that would be the case, but I thought that there was another thing going on like around December. So
earlier, right. So that was an important one, that the sun, this will be, actually there's twice, the faster moving planets are kind of like a higher melody above the deep bass of the slower moving transit. So that's part of developing expertise in using the Sarvatobhadra Chakra, because fast planets will go in and out of these important points and we can't get carried away by them. But it is interesting that the sun will go through the corners on the week of November 16 to 23. And because Saturn is still in the corner, that becomes a Sun-Saturn dosha, which should impact the leader. And, this whole thing is kind of being oriented towards Russia. So I expect the Russian leader, because they are the instigators of the invasion. So it's like they are, so we see they were succeeding when Saturn was going direct. Once Saturn turns retrograde, they're having a much harder time to succeed. And so when the sun goes through and agitates the Saturn, which will still be in Dhanishta, that should be difficulty for, the Russian leader. There'll be another, but it's only a week. Maybe it won't be enough to register, because it's fast moving. And then the sun again will go through a scream a week in February, from February 3rd to 10th. So again, problems for the leader.
Thank you very much for clarifying that.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this. It's quite a lot to take in for all of us, but it's been fascinating. I do love this. I mean, an obvious question, I think I know the answer, but I'll ask you just the same. You don't perceive any application of nuclear weapons in this conflict then, which is occupying the minds of the media, I believe. But,
yeah, that's it. That is a great question. And
I would suggest it might be the Veda of Rahu, would it?
yeah, you would want to see a Veda of Rahu, and also
The sun.
that you would want to see sun and Rahu for an explosion for sure. Major, definitely, you're absolutely right about Rahu. And so this week of November 16 to 23, stuff can come up about that. But if we look at if we look at where we are right now, Rahu, it's really key. I've mentioned the Rahu the whole time, but we see that Rahu is in Bharani nakshatra, and from Bharani, it's putting a Veda over onto Anuradha, it's putting a Veda onto Magha, and it's putting a Veda onto Kritika. So there are no planets in any of those three. Rahu itself is not under great pressure. And, so I really don't think a nuclear explosion is in the cards because, there's, as you say, Rahu would definitely have to be implicated. So as bad as all this is, it would have to be a lot worse to show a nuclear explosion.
Okay, well, we can all rest in our beds a little easier tonight.
Yes, count on it.
We'll sleep peacefully. And I love it when conferences provide peace. So there we go. So we can see that. Thank you. This is some more questions. Let me just check this.
Can I ask something, Paul, if you don't mind?
Go ahead. People are saying thank you, by the way. So
yeah.
So Sonal, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Satsriji. Very illuminating on the Sarvato. So the question is, do you foresee like some kind of escalation, like moving towards other places, this conflicts, like other countries getting involved?
That's another great question. And, as long as Saturn is still in this corner of the screen,
yeah,
anything can happen, and all the great, the worst things have happened while it is in the screen, but it really does not have much longer. It's only going to be there till November 16th, just a month more.
Mm.
So I think really that, like there could be some terrible explosion at the end of, in the middle of November, some terrible, not explosion, like not a nuclear explosion, but some, Putin could do some big last gasp, desperate measures kind of thing. It seems like every time, his reaction to being thwarted is to just do more bombing. And so that kind of thing could be going on until the middle of November. But once that Saturn goes away, I think it's going to taper off. I think we're in for the end game.
Right. Wow, amazing, interesting. So, but next year, Saturn and Ketu Saturn will aspect in, at least by Drishti, Rashi's it will aspect. So Rahu and Ketu.
Yes. So that is that's another thing when you're thinking about this Sarvatobhadra Chakra. I mean, it's like a level, aspects are at the level of Bhuvaloka and, Bhuvaloka and Bhuvaloka, especially. The Vedhas are having Drishti Bhuvaloka.
Yeah.
And in the Vedas are in Swargaloka. So it's kind of like another game. It's a game above the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's on another level beyond the solar system, true. So interesting. Lot to await.
And so once Saturn and Ketu have moved away from the corners, they've lost a lot of their potential to sting. And we'll mostly be going forward, and it's not really impacting much of anything. Pusha, nothing's going through Pusha. Maybe there'll be, nothing much. So really, it's like, a paper tiger at that point. Once it gets away from these crucial corners, things are definitely going to, just cool down a little bit.
True. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your recordings on all that. Looked like a great discussion you were doing on the nakshatra. It's so fascinating. So I can't wait to see that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I think someone's asking if you've done further work specifically on China-Taiwan situation.
Well, the China-Taiwan thing is kind of, again, past the sell-by date for these major world wars to break out. It has to be, during the time when the Sun-Saturn conjunctions are still, the Sun-Jupiter conjunctions, are still in the signs of Saturn, Capricorn or Aquarius. So that's already gone by. Sun, Jupiter are now going to conjoin in Aries or in Pisces. So it's not happening. So the serious conditions that give rise to these major historical world wars are passing us by. So I don't think the Taiwan situation will become a big major thing.
Do you think there will be an invasion, though? I think that's what personally, I don't. It's my gut feeling, but have you any thoughts? And I think that's what the delegate is asking.
I would say probably not in a major takeover violent way.
Okay. Well, let me draw the line there. Let me just end the recording with my thanks for an excellent presentation and so much work you've done. So I'll just stop it now.
Okay.